All right, so today we're diving deep into a recipe that's really more than just a meal. It's like a journey through history and culture. Jewish sweet and sour cabbage soup. And get this, our source is a recipe, FAQs, and some background from a website called Cook and Boof. What do you think of that name?
Well, it's definitely a name that sticks with you. But what's really interesting to me is that the recipe itself is presented as a family heirloom,
Yeah.
something passed down through generations. There's a real sense of personal connection there. It's not something you usually find in a random online recipe.
It really makes you want to know the stories behind the ingredients.
Hmm.
Speaking of history, this soup has deep roots in Eastern European Jewish communities.
Right, and you have to imagine a time when cabbage was a real staple food, a simple, humble vegetable that was easy to get, lasted a long time, and could be used in so many dishes.
So the sweet and sour part, from things like apples, raisins, and vinegar, that wasn't just for flavor, was it?
No, not at all. It was a way to be resourceful with what they had, to make a basic ingredient like cabbage into something really special. Especially when you think about the historical context of these communities, they often faced a lot of hardship and scarcity, so that resourcefulness takes on even more meaning.
It definitely makes that phrase love and togetherness from the recipe even more powerful. It wasn't just about eating. It was a symbol of community and resilience.
Exactly. It shows how food can be more than just a physical need. It can connect you to your heritage, to your traditions, and it creates a sense of belonging. It's like food is a cultural touchstone.
Okay, so I know you're all probably curious about how to actually make this soup. So let's take a look at the recipe and some tips from Cooking Booth.
Sure, one thing that jumps out right away is that they really stress using fresh, high-quality ingredients. That might seem obvious for any recipe, but it's especially important here because the main ingredient is so simple. Every other ingredient needs to really stand out.
It's like they're saying don't skimp on the good stuff. And I love that they give you the flexibility to change the sweetness and sourness to your liking.
That's a great point. It shows how adaptable this recipe is, and that it can work for different tastes. It's a good choice for picky eaters, too. And if you want even more flavor, they suggest using homemade chicken broth.
Okay, now that's something I can get behind. You can't beat that homemade flavor.
Mm.
And they even have some interesting variations on the basic recipe.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like, add it. We make it a little more complex, or using other root vegetables like parsnips to add texture and sweetness. And they even suggest serving it with crusty bread or for a more traditional touch matzo balls.
Speaking of matzo balls, maybe we should explain what those are for listeners who might not be familiar.
Of course. Matzo balls are a classic Ashkenazi Jewish dumpling. They're made with matzo meal eggs and fat. And they're usually served in chicken soup, especially during Passover. They add a nice chewy texture and a savory flavor. It's interesting that they're suggesting them here. It really connects this sweet and sour cabbage soup to a wider culinary heritage.
Yeah, it adds a whole other dimension to the experience. Now, Cooking Booth doesn't just give you the recipe. They also have a helpful FAQ section.
Yes, and that's where you see how practical they are. They answer questions like what other kinds of vinegar you can use, how to adjust the recipe for different diets, and even how long you can store the soup. They've clearly thought about what a home cook would need. It makes the recipe very approachable and easy to follow.
It's those little details that can make all the difference. And speaking of details, we can't forget that this soup isn't just delicious, it's actually good for you.
That's right. Cabbage itself is a nutritional powerhouse, full of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. And then you add the apples, raisins, and other veggies. And you've got a soup that's low in calories, nutrient-dense, and super satisfying. It's the best of both worlds, comforting and healthy.
I love that.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if this soup, which is traditionally enjoyed during holidays and family gatherings, could be adapted for a modern weeknight meal.
It's a good question. I think it definitely has the potential, especially with all those customizable parts we talked about. Like imagine adding lentils or chickpeas for more protein, or even a little spice with some harissa paste for a more modern twist.
Yeah, you're making me hungry. But before we get too carried away with modern adaptations, let's go back to the Cooking Booth website for a minute. I was looking at their Trending Now section, and they clearly have a lot more than just soup.
Yeah, they seem to have a really wide range of recipes, from classic comfort food to lighter, more contemporary dishes. It's fascinating to see how they're keeping their content relevant and appealing to different people.
It really shows you how important food is in our lives. It's about so much more than just eating. It's about connection, tradition, and expressing ourselves through flavor and creativity.
Absolutely. And this sweet and sour cabbage soup is a perfect example of that. It's a dish that tells a story, evokes memories, and nourishes both body and soul.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener? You've gotten some insight into a dish that's both delicious and historically rich. You've learned about its origins, explored its adaptable recipe, and discovered its surprising health benefits. But we're not done yet. In part 2 of this deep dive, we'll explore the deeper cultural significance of this soup and how it fits into the bigger picture of Jewish cuisine and tradition.
As we dig deeper into the cultural side of this sweet and sour cabbage soup, we got to remember that Jewish cuisine is really diverse. It's been shaped by so many things: geography, history, all sorts of culinary traditions.
That's so true. We always talk about Jewish food like it's one big thing, but it's really a mix of different flavors and influences.
Exactly. And this soup being from Eastern Europe, it shows the culinary heritage of the Ashkenazi Jewish community. Think about the ingredients: cabbage, apples, raisins, vinegar. These were all common flavors for generations of Ashkenazi Jews.
It's amazing how those simple ingredients became a dish that means so much more than just a meal.
It really shows how creative and resourceful Ashkenazi cooks were. They often had to work with limited ingredients, but they still made flavorful, nourishing meals for their families.
And the recipe even tells people to share it with loved ones to make it part of their family's heritage.
It's like a chain letter of deliciousness, and it makes you think about how food can connect us to past generations.
It's like this soup is a recipe for connection, just as much as it is for a tasty meal. I'm curious, in your research, have you found any other dishes that have a similar place in Jewish culture?
Oh, absolutely. Like challah, the braided bread that's often eaten on Shabbat and holidays, or matzo ball soup, a classic Jewish comfort food. These dishes are more than just recipes. They're full of symbolism, tradition, and a feeling of shared identity.
That's so true. Every bite tells a story.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about looking at food through a cultural lens. You start to see the connections between the ingredients, the techniques, and the people who created and enjoyed these dishes.
It's like we're finding hidden meanings with every spoonful.
And speaking of layers, there's something else about this sweet and sour cabbage soup that I find really interesting. It's the balance of flavors. The sweetness from the apples and raisins, the tartness of the vinegar, the savory depth of the broth. It all comes together in a really harmonious way.
That balance is key, isn't it? It's what makes the soup so satisfying and makes you want to keep eating it.
Exactly. And it reflects a bigger idea in Jewish cuisine, where contrasting flavors are often mixed together to create a sense of balance and wholeness.
I've noticed that in a lot of Jewish recipes, the mix of sweet and savory, the use of different textures, it's like a culinary dance.
And you can experience that dance yourself when you make this soup, as you add the ingredients, taste, and adjust the flavors. You're taking part in a tradition that's been going on for generations.
It's like becoming part of the story. Now, while we're talking about Cook and Boof, I wanted to say that their website is really impressive. They have a really diverse collection of recipes and food-related content.
Yeah, they definitely have a wide variety of things, from traditional favorites to more modern, innovative dishes. They're clearly trying to reach a lot of different people and make Jewish cuisine accessible and appealing to everyone.
I was really interested in their Trending Now section, which has some really cool and creative recipes.
It's great that they're keeping things fresh and exciting while still respecting the rich culinary heritage of Jewish cuisine. They seem to have found a good balance between tradition and innovation, which is so important in the food world today.
That's a really good point. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? We've gone beyond the recipe and explored the culture and history of this sweet and sour cabbage soup. We've seen how it shows the resourcefulness of Ashkenazi cooks, the importance of balance in Jewish cuisine, and how food can connect us to our heritage.
And we've also talked about how food is always changing and adapting to new influences and tastes while still keeping its core identity.
But before we wrap up our deep dive, we have one more interesting thing to talk about: the health benefits of this delicious soup. So stay tuned for the final part of our exploration, where we'll delve into the nutritional powerhouse that is Jewish sweet and sour cabbage soup. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about the history, the recipe, the cultural significance, but now it's time to explore the surprising health benefits of this simple but powerful soup.
It's pretty amazing how something so comforting and tasty can also be so good for you. And it all starts with the main ingredient, cabbage.
Yeah. We don't always give cabbage enough credit, do we? It's not exactly the most exciting vegetable. So what are we missing out on?
Well, first off, cabbage is really low in calories but packed with fiber, which is important for digestion and keeping you feeling full and satisfied. It's also a good source of vitamin C and antioxidant that boosts your immune system.
So it's like a double whammy, keeping us warm and healthy during the winter months. I like it. What else is hiding in this bowl of goodness?
Well, cabbage is also full of vitamin K, which is important for blood clotting and bone health. Plus, you've got the apples, which add even more fiber and vitamin C, and the raisins, which give you some iron and potassium.
It's like a multivitamin in soup form. I bet the homemade broth adds to the nutritional value, too.
Absolutely. A good quality broth, especially homemade, is a great source of minerals and electrolytes. It really makes the soup more hydrating and nourishing.
It's interesting how this all connects back to the historical context we talked about. This soup wasn't just a tasty tradition. It was a way to nourish communities, especially during tough times.
Exactly. It shows how clever traditional cooking was, where flavor and nutrition went hand in hand. And now, when everyone's so focused on healthy eating, this soup is a delicious and satisfying way to get more veggies and nutrients into your diet.
It's like this soup is a link between the past and the present, connecting those old culinary traditions with our modern desire for healthy and tasty meals.
I love that. It reminds us that the simplest dishes can sometimes hold the most wisdom.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final message for our listeners? We've explored the history, the recipe, the culture, and the health benefits of this amazing soup.
We've seen how it represents resourcefulness, balance, and a strong connection to tradition. And we've learned that it's not just food, it's an experience that nourishes both body and soul.
Beautifully said. Maybe it's inspired you to not only make this soup, but to also think about the stories and traditions behind your own favorite dishes. What culinary treasures are hiding in your family history? We encourage you to explore, to experiment, and to share the joy of food with the people you love.
Remember, every dish has a story to tell, and every bite is a chance to connect with the past, enjoy the present, and create new traditions for the future.
Thanks for joining us on this delicious journey. Until next time, happy cooking.